They won the election. They must have forgotten that Republicans continued to hold the majority in the House. You know, the president's idea of a negotiation is roll over and do what I ask. We need to find common ground, and we need to find it quickly.
What are the chances we're going to go over the cliff?
There's clearly a chance.
Can you promise that we will not go over the cliff?
No, I can't promise that. That's a decision that lies in the hands of the Republicans that are now opposing increases in tax rates. If they recognize the reality that we can't afford to extend those tax rates, then we have the basis for an agreement to be very good for the Americans.
Congressman, I'm not hearing a lot of give on the entitlements on this side.
Well, again, there's a major philosophical difference over the best approach to savings in Medicare. Right. We do not believe we should be passing costs on the seniors.
So the answer is no.
No, that's not true. You can reform Medicare. You can build on what we did in the Affordable Care Act.
What are you going to give Republicans to get them to a place where you can negotiate a final deal?
Well, there are cuts in the president's budget. I mean, I know the Republicans haven't really paid attention to them.
Congressman, I haven't heard anything new that you're giving them. Charles.
Look, I heard what the congressman said, and it is clear that they are not serious at all about entitlements, which, as the president himself has said, that's where the money is. On Social Security, he denied that there's any effect on the deficit at all. In fact, Dick Durbin said earlier last week that Social Security hasn't added a dime to the deficit. In fact, in 2012, it adds $160 billion of debt. That's more than a dime. And they pretend, you heard Von Holland say, there's $2.5 trillion in the trust fund of Social Security that will take care of it for 20 more years, 25 more years. That means there are pieces of paper in the trust fund where the Treasury says, we will pay you, but it doesn't have the money. It spent the surpluses in the past. That is simply a promise from a Treasury which is bankrupt and has to borrow $1 trillion a year from the Chinese simply to pay its bills today. So that's a fiction, and they know it, but they won't touch Social Security. Why? Because of the political implication. The Republicans are bad guys and they're good guys. Same on Medicare. He said, we don't want to balance it on the backs of the seniors. As if you're going to reform this, which is killing the budget. Everybody agrees that's the one area where the Treasury is hemorrhaging. But by in any way impacting seniors, we're going to get it out of the drug companies, which is absurd. The only way to attack this is to actually slow down the growth of health care. And the one area where you could really do that, tort reform, where a quarter of all spending in medicine is spent on defensive maneuvers, which are unneeded. That's $600 billion a year. There's not a word of that in Obamacare. They have no interest in that. And then the reason is because it would offend the trial lawyers. On every entitlement, they have shown zero serious.
But I mean, what did we think? I mean, thinking that putting this problem off until the very end was suddenly going to be easier at the end than it was at the beginning. I mean, it was a status quo election in some respects. I mean, all the three leaders are still in their positions. This shouldn't be that surprising to us.
Well, it's surprising to me that the president essentially, who could get the revenues he wants from deductions and exclusions, but insist on rates, not for economic reasons, but political. He wants to break the back of Republicans. This is a continuation of his campaign. He thinks he won it, and now he wants to drive a stake through the Republicans. It's all about politics. It's nothing about economics.
Today, I want to make it absolutely clear to Assad and those under his command, the world is watching. The use of chemical weapons is and would be totally unacceptable. And if you make the tragic mistake of using these weapons, there will be consequences and you will be held accountable.
President Stern warning to Syria, this after U.S. officials told Fox News that chemical weapons had been moved today in Syria. Also, Secretary of State Clinton on a trip today said that would be a red line for the United States.
I think the problem for us is less that Assad will use the weapons, because that would be suicidal. Makes no sense, and I don't see how he gains a lot by doing it. And he will hang if he does that. But the fact that they will be loose. It seems as if with the rebels acquiring the shoulder weapons like the Stingers in Afghanistan that turned the tide of war, the weapons that can bring down a helicopter or a plane, the tide is turning. Once the rebels can negate the air power, they will be able to maintain control of the land, which they are acquiring, and they are acquiring, and in the end strangle Damascus and bring the regime down. What they're looking at now, I think, in Washington is a change of regime, I think almost inevitable over the next few months. And the problem is, where are these weapons going to end up? This is the biggest store of chemical weapons, probably at least active ones in the world, and they will be loose. This has never happened before. I think we might be forced to send in our troops simply as a way to secure them because of the jihadists among the rebels, ironically enough. And that's what I think our concern is here.
I remember on this panel at the very beginning talking about number of days that Assad would be in power. Number of days. And then we were talking about number of weeks. You know, now
one of the reasons is that he has had unimpeded supplies from Russia, Iran, through Iraq, because Obama never worked out a deal with Iraq, a status of forces agreement, where we would control its airspace. All this stuff is going into Syria, including fighters from Iran. So Assad has had outside help, and the rebels have had none. And that's a huge difference, and he kept him in power. But if he loses control of air power, he'll lose the country.
This has been a Sunfish production.